It started with an empty driveway and the sound of my ATV engine roaring in the distance. I turned my head, and there she was, Karen's spoiled daughter, riding past me, smiling like she owned it. The HOA tried to silence me. They said the rules would protect her. But what happened next, nobody in this neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to the HOA Society. I'm David. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood with white fences and loud secrets. By day, I fix cars at a small garage downtown. But at home, I fight a different kind of battle. The one that starts with petty rules and ends with neighbors who think they're untouchable. And this is the story of how one spoiled girl stole my ATV, and how the HOA's power trip finally came crashing down. Spoiled HOA Karen's daughter stole my ATV, said HOA rules protect her, got arrested. That morning, I stood in my driveway, staring at the empty spot where my ATV was supposed to be. The sunlight hit the pavement, but it felt cold, hollow, and then I heard it, the familiar growl of the engine. It echoed from down the street, loud, arrogant, like a slap to the face. I turned my head, and there she was, Karen's daughter, blonde ponytail bouncing, pink hoodie glowing in the sun. She sat on my ATV like it had always been hers, hands gripping the handlebars, a smile plastered across her face. She looked right at me, smirked, and revved the engine even louder. Before circling around like she was showing off, my stomach dropped, my fists clenched. It wasn't just theft, it was mockery. She wasn't hiding it. She was flaunting it in broad daylight. And the worst part, I knew exactly why she thought she could get away with it. Her mother, Karen, the HOA president, the woman who believed she controlled every blade of grass in this neighborhood, every trash bin, every fence post. She thought the HOA rules were her personal weapon, and that her family was above them all. I walked down the driveway slowly, never breaking eye contact. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some even stepped onto their porches. But no one said a word. They never did. Not when it involved Karen. She held too much power, too many connections, and in their silence, I felt the weight of my isolation. I raised my voice, steady but sharp. That's my ATV. Get off of it now. Her laugh was soft, cruel. My mom says the HOA protects me, so you can't do anything. And with that, she revved again, the sound cutting through the quiet street like a warning siren. I wanted to drag her off right there, but I knew if I did, Karen would twist it. The HOA board would find me, accuse me of harassment. The rules were written to protect them, not us. So I watched. As she parked it in their driveway, like a trophy, she hopped off casually, tossed her hair back, and walked inside without a glance. And the red ATV, my ATV, sat there in the open, under Karen's porch light, mocking me with every reflection. I barely slept that night. I kept pacing, thinking of how I bought that ATV with months of savings, overtime shifts at the garage. It wasn't just a toy, it was my escape. On weekends, I rode trails in the woods, felt freedom, speed, air rushing against me. And now, it was sitting in the clutches of a spoiled brat who didn't even know how to respect it. By morning, I had decided I was going to take it back, not with fists, not with threats, but with proof, with patience. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos of the ATV in their driveway, zoomed in on the plate, even recorded video of her riding it. I thought, this will convince the HOA. This will end it. I was wrong. That evening I walked into the HO, a meeting. It was the same scene as always. Folding chairs in the community hall, lukewarm coffee, the faint smell of disinfectant. Karen sat at the front table, gavel in hand, smug smile plastered on her face like she was royalty. Beside her, two board members who might as well have been her puppets. I stepped forward, laid my evidence on the table. Photos, video, serial number papers. This is my ATV, I said. Your daughter stole it. I want it returned immediately. For a moment, silence. Whispers in the room, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then Karen leaned forward, eyes sparkling with fake innocence. Shared property disputes are not the responsibility of the HOA, she said. And from what I hear, you've been harassing my daughter, intimidating her, making her afraid to walk outside. The board nodded, scribbling notes. As if her lies were scripture, I stood frozen, mouth open, rage boiling in my chest. And then, the final blow, they fined me, $300, for harassment. I almost laughed, but it came out bitter. Broken, the thief was protected, and the victim was punished. That was the HOA way. I walked home that night, neighbors whispering as I passed. Some looked away. Others gave me pitying eyes. But no one spoke up. No one ever stood against Karen. She was untouchable. At least, that's what everyone thought. The next few days were hell. Every morning her daughter rode past my house on my ATV. She revved the engine louder than before, sometimes even stopping in front of my driveway to spin the wheels, leaving marks on the pavement. It was psychological warfare, a spoiled girl's idea of fun. But it cut deeper than she could ever understand. Letters appeared on my door, fines stacking up, disturbance of peace, parking violations, things that made no sense. And at night, Karen herself walked past my house slowly, binder in hand, leaving little notes with messages like, "Rules are rules. Don't test me. HOA, law, is bigger than you." I knew she wanted me broken, humiliated, forced to bend, but each note only fueled me more. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I started looking into the real laws. The ones outside Karen's little binder. HOA rules were one thing, but theft was theft, and the law didn't care about Karen's power trips. Still, I hesitated, because calling the police meant going nuclear. And once I did, there would be no going back. But maybe that was the only way. As I stared out my window, watching her daughter circle the cul-de-sac again on my ATV, I realized something. This wasn't just about a stolen ride. This was about power, about control. And I wasn't just fighting for my ATV. I was fighting for every neighbor too scared to speak up. The question was, would they stand with me when the time came? Or would they keep hiding behind their curtains? I thought maybe things would cool down. That maybe after the board meeting, Karen would feel she had won, and she'd let it go. But I was wrong. Things were just getting started. The next morning, I opened my door and nearly tripped over a letter taped to it. The paper was bright yellow, bold letters at the top. HOA notice. My stomach twisted. Even before I read it, it said I was being fined. Again. For excessive noise. Noise? I laughed out loud, because the only noise had been my ATV, which I hadn't touched in days. Because it was parked in Karen's driveway, I crumpled the paper, threw it in the trash. But deep inside, the anger burned hotter. Karen was baiting me, stacking violations, trying to bury me under HOA rules until I broke. Her daughter, but she, on the other hand, was having the time of her life. That afternoon, she came speeding down the street on my ATV. She swerved close to my mailbox, nearly knocked it over, then screeched to a stop in front of my yard. Neighbors peeked out again, phones in hand, some recording, some pretending not to. And then she shouted, "Nice ATV, thanks for the gift." Her laugh echoed, sharp, cruel. As she sped off again, I stood there frozen. Every bone in my body screamed to chase her, drag her off, end it. But I didn't move, because that's what they wanted. They wanted me angry, reckless, easy to frame. Karen's smile behind every curtain, her daughter's laugh in every echo. They wanted me to snap. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of notices. Every one of them a lie. Trash bins left out too long, grass too high, mailbox angle wrong. Each one signed with Karen's perfect little handwriting, like a queen signing death warrants. Finally, I opened my laptop. I typed in every law I could find. Property theft, HOA limits, homeowners' rights, page after page, forum after forum. Stories of other people fighting back against corrupt HOAs, and buried in all that mess, I found it. The line that made my heart race. HOA rules cannot override state law, and theft was theft. No matter what binder Karen waved in my face, the next day, I decided enough was enough. I walked straight to Karen's house, knocked hard on the door. She opened it with that fake smile. like she'd been waiting behind her. I could see my ATV parked in the garage, the red shining in the dim light like a hostage. "Return it," I said. She tilted her head, eyes wide with false innocence. "Oh, you mean the community vehicle? My daughter found it unattended, so of course she's keeping it safe." Her daughter's laugh came from the living room, mocking, careless. I stepped closer. "That's mine. You know it's mine. And if you don't give it back, I'm going to the police." Karen's smile didn't falter. Instead, she leaned in, whispered low, "Go ahead. Call them. We'll see who they believe. A respected HOA president, or the man with harassment complaints and unpaid fines." My chest tightened, fury rising like fire. But I turned, walked away. Not because she had won, but because I finally understood. This wasn't just about an ATV. This was about control, intimidation, power, and the only way to beat people like Karen was to hit them where they couldn't fight back. That evening, I called the police. The officer on the phone listened quietly as I explained. I gave him photos, serial number documents, proof of ownership. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He simply said, "We'll send a unit to take a look." My hands shook as I hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in Karen's armor. But cracks can make dangerous people even more desperate. The very next morning, she showed up at my door, her blazer pressed, her smile sharp like a knife. "Did you call the police?" she asked. I stayed silent. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed sweet. "You should know. The HOA can make your life very difficult if you go down this path." I almost laughed, as if she hadn't already been making my life hell. Later that day, the squad car rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Red and blue lights reflected off the houses. Neighbors rushed out like ants. Karen stood in her driveway, binder clutched to her chest, her daughter lounging on the ATV like it was a throne. The officers stepped out. They spoke to me first, calm, professional. Then they walked over to Karen. I watched every movement, every flicker of her fake smile as she explained. She pointed at me, waved her binder, rattled off HOA rules like they were scripture. The officers nodded, but their faces didn't change. Then they turned. Asked her daughter to step off the ATV. She refused. "I don't have to. My mom runs the HOA. She said I'm untouchable." Her words carried across the street, sharp, arrogant. Some neighbors gasped, others spared, and for the first time, Karen's smile cracked. One of the officers pulled out his notepad. He wrote down her words, her refusal. Then he pulled out handcuffs. The laughter died instantly. The spoiled smirk faded, replaced by shock. Her daughter shouted, cursed. But the officers didn't flinch. They cuffed her. Right there in the driveway, in front of every neighbor, in front of Karen. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clicking of the cuffs and the hum of my ATV being rolled back to me. Karen screamed, tried to argue, waved her binder of rules like it was holy scripture, but the officers didn't care because HOA rules don't matter to the law. As they drove away with her daughter in the back seat, the neighborhood felt different. The whispers had changed, from fear to disbelief to something else, something almost like hope. I stood there with my ATV back in my driveway, and I realized something. Karen had lost her shield. Her daughter had exposed the truth, that the HOA's power was just paper, and paper burns. But the story doesn't end there, because power like Karen's doesn't disappear overnight. It hides. It waits. It plans its next move, and that's what scared me most. When the police car turned the corner and disappeared with Karen's daughter in the back seat, the whole street stood frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. It was like the neighborhood itself didn't know what to do. Karen stood in her driveway, binder clutched tight against her chest, her face pale but her eyes burning. I had never seen her like that. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't smug. She wasn't untouchable. She looked small. The neighbors, the same ones who had always stayed silent, suddenly came alive. Whispers filled the air. Footsteps shuffled. Doors opened, one by one. They started stepping closer. Not to me, not to Karen, but to each other. It was like they were realizing, for the first time, that Karen wasn't invincible. A man from 2 houses down shook his head. "I told her that girl was trouble," he muttered. Another neighbor, a woman who had never even waved at me before, leaned in and whispered, "Good for you," standing up to them. I didn't answer. I just stood there by my ATV, my hands gripping the handlebars so tight my knuckles turned white. I wasn't celebrating, because I knew this wasn't over. Karen finally snapped out of her silence. She pointed at me, her voice shrill, shaking with fury. "This isn't the end. You'll regret this. You all will." Her words cut through the crowd, sharp and ugly, but for the first time, people didn't look away. They stared back, and Karen, the queen of the HOA, realized she was standing alone. That night, I parked my ATV back in the garage, locked it tight, double-checked every chain and latch. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, my chest heavy. I should have felt victory, relief, justice. But instead, I felt something else, dread. Because people like Karen, they don't surrender. They retreat, regroup, and come back sharper than before. The first sign came the very next morning, another notice on my door. But this one was different. The paper wasn't yellow. It was bright red, final warning stamped across the top in angry letters. It accused me of endangering community safety. It said my property was under special review, and if I didn't comply, I could face further legal action. I laughed, bitter and hollow. Further legal action? What did that even mean? Karen was bluffing, stretching the rules, trying to scare me back into silence. But deep down, it worked. I felt the fear crawling back into my stomach, because I knew Karen wasn't just angry anymore. She was humiliated, and humiliation makes people dangerous that evening. I noticed something strange. Lights flickering across the street, shadows moving near my driveway. When I stepped outside, I saw it, a camera. Someone had placed a small HOA security camera facing directly at my house. It wasn't for the street. It wasn't for the community. It was for me. I stormed across the cul-de-sac, banged on Karen's door. She opened it slowly. Her smile had returned, that smug plastic grin. "Is there a problem?" she asked sweetly. "You put a camera on my house," I snapped. Her eyes sparkled. "For safety reasons. The community voted on it." I looked around, the neighbors watching from their porches, heads shaking. None of them had voted. Karen was lying again, rewriting reality. And daring anyone to call her out, I clenched my fists. But I didn't say another word, because I finally understood her game. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about breaking me, piece by piece. She couldn't erase the arrest, but she could make my life miserable until I begged for peace. And that's exactly what she tried to do. Every day, more notices appeared, some for my trash cans, some for my lawn, some for things that weren't even real. At night, new cameras appeared, hidden in bushes, nailed to trees, all pointed at me. And the whispers returned, not from the neighbors, but from Karen herself. She would walk past my house, binder in hand, her heels clicking on the pavement. Sometimes she would mutter just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll pay for this." Other times, she would stop at the edge of my yard, smile, and say, "You don't belong here anymore." It was psychological warfare, and it was working. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Even when I rode my ATV again, the joy was gone. Because every time the engine roared, I imagined Karen watching, writing, plotting. One night, I found another note on my porch, but this one was different. No HOA letterhead, no fine, just one sentence, written in bold black marker. "You think the police will protect you?" My blood ran cold. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat, and I realized this had gone beyond rules and fines. This was personal. I sat in the day, gripping the note, my mind racing. What was Karen planning? Would she try to sabotage me? Frame me? Push me out of the neighborhood completely? Because if she couldn't win with rules, she'd find another way. And that's when the paranoia set in. Every car that slowed down near my house, I thought it was her. Every knock on the door, I expected another notice. Every shadow in my yard, I imagined Karen or her daughter lurking. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, details. Because if Karen was going to wage war, I was going to build my own case. Not for the HOA, not for the neighbors, but for the law, because the only thing that scares a tyrant is losing real power. Still, deep inside, I wondered, how far would Karen go to get revenge? And would I even see it coming? I used to think the worst thing about living under an HOA was the petty rules, the mailbox height, the lawn color, the trash bin schedule. But I was wrong. The worst thing was when someone like Karen learned how to turn those rules into weapons. After her daughter's arrest, she didn't back down. She doubled down. The fines multiplied, the notices piled higher, and the cameras, they seemed to grow overnight, multiplying like weeds, each one pointing at me like an accusing finger. At first, I thought it was just harassment, annoying, yes, but survivable. But then, it got darker. One morning I woke up and found my garage door wide open. The lock wasn't broken. It wasn't forced. It was reset, like someone who knew the code had been there. My ATV was still inside. But the thought that someone had been in my space touched my things. It made my skin crawl. I checked the cameras on my own property. But of course, the feed was blank for the whole night. Wiped. I didn't have to guess who had done it. Karen had friends, and those friends had access. When I confronted her at the next board meeting, she didn't deny it. She smiled, tapped her pen against her binder, and said, "Maybe you should upgrade your security. HOA isn't responsible for private property mishaps." Her words were polite, but her eyes told the truth. She wanted me scared. She wanted me paranoid. She wanted me broken. But here's the thing about war. Fear can make you weak, but it can also make you dangerous. I started documenting everything, every letter, every camera, every word she muttered under her breath when she walked past my house. I bought a small notebook, kept it in my pocket at all times, and with every entry, I felt stronger because Karen's power was paper, and paper works both ways. The neighbors started noticing too. At first, they just whispered, but slowly, they started talking to me directly. One evening, Mr. Jenkins from down the street shuffled over. He's an old man, lives alone since his wife passed. He leaned in close and said, "You're not crazy. She's been after me too. Fined me for leaving my porch light on too late." Another day, a young couple stopped by. They whispered about their mailbox being painted the wrong shade of beige. Karen fined them too. "She's out of control," the wife said. "But we're scared to say anything." And just like that, the cracks spread wider. Karen wasn't just at war with me. She was at war with the whole neighborhood. They just didn't know it yet. One night, as I sat in my living room, I heard the sound of metal scraping. I rushed outside and froze. Someone had spray painted across my garage door in bright red letters, HOA trash. I stood there, heart pounding, fists shaking. Neighbors peeked out, again silent, again afraid, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't judging me. They were watching Karen's power trip spiral out of control. I took pictures. Phil, in another report, the police came, looked at the graffiti, nodded, but they didn't make any arrests. No cameras had caught it. No witnesses spoke up. And Karen, well, she smiled extra wide the next time I saw her. "This is what happens when you fight the community," she said, her voice soft, but dripping with poison. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced back and forth, the notebook heavy in my pocket, my mind racing, because now it wasn't just about me. Karen had gone too far. She was terrorizing the whole neighborhood, and I knew, sooner or later, someone had to stop her. The question was, how? I thought about lawsuits. I thought about petitions. I even thought about moving, packing up my life and leaving this nightmare behind. But then, I remembered the look on her face when the police cuffed her daughter, that crack in her armor, and I realized the only way to win was to make that crack even bigger. So I started talking, not shouting, not accusing, just talking. To every neighbor who would listen, I told them about my ATV. I showed them the fines. I let them read the notes she left on my door. And slowly, I watched their fear turn into something else, anger. One night, Mr. Jenkins came over again. He sat on my porch, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "You're not alone. We're tired of her too." Those words hit me like thunder, because for the first time, I realized this wasn't just my fight, it was everyone's fight. But Karen, she could feel it. She knew her grip was slipping, and desperate people, they lash out harder when they feel power slipping through their fingers. The next week, she called an emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. Every homeowner had to be there. The hall was packed, the air thick with tension. Karen stood at the front, binder open, her voice loud and sharp. "This community is under attack," she declared. "Certain individuals are spreading lies, breaking rules, destroying the harmony we've worked so hard to build." Her eyes locked on me. The room buzzed. Some neighbors glared, but others shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in that crowd. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't yell, I didn't curse. I simply held up my notebook, and I read the fines, the threats, the graffiti, the cameras, every little thing she had done, laid bare in simple words. Undeniable. The room went silent. Even Karen's smile faltered, because paper, the same weapon she had always used, was now cutting her back. People started murmuring, voices rose, questions flew, and suddenly, Karen wasn't in control anymore. Her binder trembled in her hands. Her voice cracked as she tried to regain order, but the damage was done. The queen of the HOA had lost her throne. Still, I knew this wasn't over, because Karen was like a storm, and storms don't just vanish, they rebuild. They strike again when you least expect it. As I walked home that night, neighbors patting me on the back, whispering thanks. I couldn't shake the feeling. The war had only just begun. When I walked out of that HOA meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief for once. The weight wasn't only on my shoulders. I wasn't fighting Karen alone anymore. The neighbors had seen the truth. They had heard the proof, and even if they were still scared, I could feel it. The tide was turning that night. I sat on my porch with my notebook in my lap, one by one. People walked by. Some stopped, shook my hand. Others whispered encouragement. A few even slipped me copies of their own HOA notices. Fines for things so petty, so ridiculous. It was almost funny. Too many weeds, porch light too bright, holiday decorations too distracting. It wasn't just me. Karen had been tormenting everyone, and for the first time, they were ready to fight back. We started small, late-night conversations on porches, group chats, buzzing quietly on our phone. Sharing photos of letters, screenshots of fines, whispers about Karen's tricks. It felt dangerous, like we were part of some secret rebellion, and maybe we were. But Karen, she wasn't blind. She felt the shift, the murmurs, the stares when she walked down the street, and she hated it. The very next morning, retaliation came. I woke up to find another notice taped to my door. But this one wasn't about me. It was about the whole neighborhood. Effective immediately. All homeowners must repaint their mailboxes to HOA standard beige. Failure to comply. $200 fine per household. I laughed, out loud, bitter and sharp. This wasn't about mailboxes. This was Karen's way of punishing everyone for daring to question her. And it worked. For a while. The neighborhood buzzed with anger. People muttered under their breath, cursed as they read the notice. But most of them still reached for paintbrushes. Because fear, even when weakened, still has claws. But not everyone gave in that evening. Mr. Jenkins shuffled onto my porch again. His hands shook, but his eyes were steady. "I'm not painting a damn thing," he said. "I've lived here 40 years. That mailbox has been fine the whole time. If she wants to find me, let her try." His words hit me like lightning, because if an old man like Jenkins was ready to defy Karen, then maybe others would too. The next day, I walked door to door, quietly, carefully. I told the neighbors about Jenkins. I told them about strength in numbers. I told them the only way to beat Karen was together, and slowly, the resistance grew. But Karen wasn't giving up. The cameras doubled. The letters grew nastier. And then, the threats started. One night I found a note shoved under my door. No letterhead this time, no fines, just 6 words, scratched in angry handwriting. "Leave this before it gets worse." My stomach knotted because, hey, that wasn't HOA business. That was personal. That was Karen. The next morning, The neighborhood woke up to chaos. Someone had slashed Jenkins's tires, deep, angry cuts, rubber shredded and taped to his windshield. Was another bright red notice. Failure to comply with mailbox standards. The message was clear. Karen wasn't just fining us anymore. She was sending warnings. Neighbors gathered around Jenkins' car, shaking their heads, whispering in outrage. And for the first time, I saw something in their eyes that I hadn't seen before. Defiance. We held a meeting that night, not in the community hall, but in my garage. 15 neighbors crammed inside, voices low but urgent. We shared stories, evidence, plans. We talked about calling lawyers, about contacting the state housing board, about filing a petition to remove Karen as president. It felt risky, it felt dangerous, but it also felt right. Still, I couldn't shake the fear because Karen wasn't going to roll over. She was going to fight. And desperate people, they fight dirty. The very next day, I found my ATV again. This time, tipped on its side in my driveway, scratches carved deep into the paint, the seat torn open, wires dangling. It wasn't stolen this time. It was destroyed. I stood there staring at it, rage boiling in my chest, and when I looked up, I saw her. Karen, standing at the end of the street, binder in hand, smiling. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That night, I sat in the garage staring at the broken ATV. It wasn't about the machine anymore. It was about the message Karen was showing me, showing all of us, that she was still in control. But maybe, just maybe, she had gone too far this time, because the next morning, half the neighborhood showed up at my door. Jenkins, the young couple, even families I barely knew. They stood in my driveway, angry, united, and for the first time they weren't whispering. They were demanding. We've had enough. I looked at their faces, tired, fed up, but determined, and I realized the war was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all of us. We started organizing. Petitions were drafted, complaints filed with the county. We even talked about electing a new HOA board. And as the movement grew, Karen's grip weakened. But deep inside, I knew she wasn't finished. She was planning something bigger, something worse. Because people like Karen, they don't fade quietly, they explode, and I had to be ready. The night after my ATV was destroyed, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage, staring at the torn seat, the scratched paint, the bent handlebars. Every mark felt personal, like Karen herself had carved her anger into the metal. But strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else, determined, because destroying my ATV didn't scare me anymore. It exposed her. It showed the whole neighborhood that Karen would stop at nothing, and people were tired of living under that kind of rule. The next morning, the rebellion began. Jenkins was the first. He walked outside, planted a bright pink flamingo in his yard, a direct violation of the no lawn ornaments rule. Neighbors gasped, laughed nervously, and then they applauded. By evening, 3 more houses had flamingos, 2 had inflatable pool toys tied to mailboxes, and 1 family even painted their fence neon blue. It was chaos. Beautiful chaos. And Karen hated it. The notices came fast, red papers plastered on every door, fines piling like snow. But this time, no one paid. They crumpled the notices, tossed them into trash bins. Some even taped them back onto Karen's door in defiance. For the first time, the power of the HOA rules was fading, but Karen wasn't done. She called another emergency meeting, this time with lawyers by her side. The hall was packed, her voice louder than ever. "These violations threaten our property values," she cried. "These rebels are destroying the community." She pointed at me again, her fingers shaking with rage. "This man is leading a dangerous movement, and if we don't stop him, he will ruin us all." But something had changed. The neighbors didn't shrink back. They stood taller. Some even shouted back, "You ruined this community yourself. Your rules are the problem." Karen slammed her gavel, but the sound was drowned out by voices. For the first time, she had lost control of the room. I walked to the front, my notebook in hand, and laid it on the table. Pages of evidence, fines, threats, photos of graffiti, pictures of the broken ATV. The crowd roared, not in fear, but in anger. Karen's lawyers tried to speak, quoting bylaws, reciting rules. But no one listened, because the people weren't afraid anymore, and fear had been Karen's only weapon. She stormed out of the meeting. Binder clutched to her chest like a shield, but I knew. She wasn't retreating. She was planning her next strike. And I was right. The very next morning, the entire neighborhood woke up to a new rule. All homeowners must submit to weekly inspections of property. Failure to comply. $500 fine. The audacity made me laugh. Weekly inspections. Karen wanted to march into our homes, invade our privacy, humiliate us in our own yards. It was madness. But instead of fear, it sparked something else. Rage. Neighbors gathered in my driveway again. This time louder, bolder. We decided on a new strategy. We would comply, but in the most painful way possible. The next week, when Karen and her inspectors came down the street, they found a circus. Lawns covered in rubber chickens, mailboxes painted with cartoon faces, driveways lined with inflatable flamingos and plastic gnomes wearing sunglasses. And every homeowner stood proudly in front of their house, smiling like it was a parade. Karen's face turned red, her voice shrill as she scribbled violation after violation. Her binder overflowed with papers. Her inspectors shook their heads, overwhelmed, exhausted. By the end of the day, she had written so many fines. She couldn't even keep track. It was a mountain of meaningless paper, and everyone knew it, because rules only work when people obey them, and no one was obeying anymore. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over a street filled with flamingos and laughter. For the first time, the neighborhood felt alive, not controlled, not fearful, but free. But still, I couldn't relax, because I knew Karen wasn't finished. She had lost the battle, but she wasn't ready to lose the war. And sure enough, just past midnight, I heard it. The sound of glass shattering. I rushed outside and froze. Jenkins' front window was broken. Shards scattered across his porch, on the wall beside it. Spray paint again. This time the message was clear. Rebels will pay. Neighbors rushed out. Gasps filled the air. Jenkins stood in his doorway, trembling but unbroken, and when his eyes met mine, I saw it. The fear was gone, replaced by anger. "This ends now," he said. The crowd murmured in agreement. It wasn't just defiance anymore. It was a movement, and Karen was losing. But I knew, the more desperate she became, the more dangerous she would get. And the question burning in my chest was simple. How far would she go to hold on to power? The night after Jenkins' window was smashed, I didn't sleep. No one did. The whole neighborhood was on edge. Lights flickering in every window, whispers echoing across the cul-de-sac. We all knew who had done it, and we all knew. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was war. The next morning, the rebellion went public. A group of neighbors marched straight to the county office. They carried my notebook, Jenkins's broken glass, copies of every fine and notice Karen had ever shoved under our doors. They demanded an investigation. They demanded her removal. And for the first time, someone outside our neighborhood finally listened. When Karen found out, she exploded. She stormed down the street like a queen stripped of her crown. Binder clutched tight, her voice shrill and cracking. "You think the county will save you?" she screamed. "You think they care? This is my neighborhood, my rules." But her words didn't have power anymore. People didn't shrink back. They didn't look away. They stood taller, stronger, and they stared right back at her, for the first time. Karen looked small, but small people, cornered people, are the most dangerous of all. That evening, the sky turned dark with storm clouds. The air felt heavy, electric, like something bad was coming. And I was right. Around midnight, a loud crash shook my house. I ran outside, heart pounding, and froze. My garage was on fire. Flames licked up the wooden beams, smoke curling into the night sky. Neighbors rushed out, shouting, calling 911. I grabbed a hose, tried to fight it back, but the fire spread too fast, and through the smoke, I saw her. Karen, standing across the street, her eyes wild, her smile twisted. She didn't even try to hide it. She just watched as the fire consumed everything. The sirens wailed. Firefighters rushed in. The flames finally died, but the damage was done. My garage was gone. My ATV. reduced to ashes. I sat on the curb, coughing, shaking, staring at the blackened wreck, and when I looked up, I saw the neighbors. They weren't just angry now, they were furious. "This has to end," someone shouted. "She's gone too far," another cried, and for the first time, the whole neighborhood spoke as one. The next day, the county officials arrived. They went door to door, collecting statements, evidence, photos of the graffiti, recordings of Karen's threats, and then they went to her house. Karen stood on her porch, binder in hand, screaming about rules, waving papers in the ATV air like they meant something, but this time, no one listened, not the neighbors, not the county, not even the police who stood waiting beside her driveway. When they cuffed her, her binder fell to the ground, papers scattered across the lawn, fines, notices, threats, all meaningless now. Her daughter screamed from the doorway, but no one moved to help, because the queen of the HOA had finally fallen. The neighborhood was silent, watching as the car drove away, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like fear, it felt like peace. In the days that followed, the neighborhood changed. The flamingos stayed on the lawns, mailboxes stayed painted in bright colors, and for once, no one cared. People laughed louder, talked longer, waved at each other more often. It felt human again. As for me, I rebuilt the garage. I didn't replace the ATV right away. But I didn't need to, because I had something better. Freedom, sometimes, late at night. I still hear echoes of Karen's voice in my head, the way she said, "This is my neighborhood," the way she believed her binder made her untouchable, and I smile, because in the end, it wasn't me who destroyed her, it was her own arrogance. She thought rules made her powerful, but she forgot the most important rule of all: when people stand together, no binder in the world can control them. Now let me ask you something. If you had lived in this neighborhood and watched the HOA president burn everything down trying to keep control, would you have stayed to rebuild or packed your bags and left forever? Tell me in the comments, because this story might be over, but the scars of suburbia never really fade.